lost everything. He lost even more. When a silent Comanche warrior is offered a grieving white widow as a political bride, no one expected what came next. What happens when two broken people are forced together, but discover something neither thought they'd find again? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the small frontier settlement of Cedar Ridge in the spring of 1867. Sarah Bennett stood at the edge of the wooden fort, her black mourning dress absorbing the oppressive heat as she stared out at the endless prairie that had swallowed her husband 6 months ago. At 23, widowhood had found her too soon, leaving her alone in a harsh land with nothing but debts and a small cabin that leaked when the rains came. The fort's commander, Captain William Thornton, approached her with heavy footsteps that announced his presence before his gruff voice did. "Mrs. Bennett, we need to discuss your situation." His weathered face showed little sympathy, only the hard pragmatism of a man responsible for keeping peace on the volatile frontier. The Comanche have requested a council. Their war chief, a man called Silent Wolf, has offered horses and provisions in exchange for a bride. The tribal elders believe a union would strengthen the peace treaty we've been negotiating. Sarah felt her blood turn cold despite the heat. "You cannot be serious, Captain. You're asking me to marry a savage." The word tasted bitter on her tongue, born from fear and the countless stories she'd heard of Comanche raids and violence. "I'm not asking, Mrs. Bennett. I'm telling you that you have two choices. Accept this arrangement or leave the fort with nothing. Your late husband's debts exceed what his land was worth. You have no family here, no means of support." Captain Thornton's eyes held a mixture of guilt and determination. The man they call Silent Wolf hasn't spoken a word in 3 years, according to the scouts. He lost his wife and child in a cavalry raid on his village. He's agreed to this arrangement to honor his chief's wishes for peace. Sarah's hands trembled as she clutched the fabric of her dress. "When must I give my answer?" "Tomorrow at dawn. The Comanche delegation arrives at noon." The captain turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Bennett, this might be your best chance at survival. The frontier doesn't forgive the unprepared, and winter comes hard in these parts." That night, Sarah sat alone in her cabin, a single candle flickering against the darkness. She thought of her parents back in Philadelphia, of the life she'd left behind to follow Jonathan Bennett to Texas with dreams of land and prosperity. Those dreams had died with him, trampled beneath a spooked horse during a simple supply run. Now she faced a choice between starvation and surrender to a life she couldn't begin to imagine. When dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sarah walked to the captain's quarters with her decision. "I'll do it," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the terror coiling in her stomach. "I'll marry this Silent Wolf." The Comanche delegation arrived as promised, a group of 15 warriors on horseback, their bearing proud and their expressions unreadable. Among them rode a man who commanded attention without saying a word. Silent Wolf sat atop a painted stallion, his long dark hair flowing past his shoulders, adorned with eagle feathers and leather ties. His face was striking, with high cheekbones and deep-set eyes that seemed to see through everything they touched. Scars marked his chest and arms, testament to battles fought and survived. His physical presence was undeniable, tall and powerfully built, moving with a grace that spoke of strength held in careful control. Sarah stood beside Captain Thornton as the negotiations proceeded through an interpreter, an older Comanche woman named Nadua who had lived among both peoples. Silent Wolf's eyes found Sarah's and held them, and in that moment she saw something unexpected. Not cruelty or savagery, but a profound sadness that mirrored her own grief. "He offers 20 horses, buffalo hides, and dried meat stores for the winter," Nadua translated, though Silent Wolf made no sound, communicating only through signs and gestures. "He promises protection and provision. He asks only that she come willingly and learn the ways of the people." Sarah's voice caught in her throat. "Tell him I agree, but ask him why he wants this marriage if he does not seek to replace what he has lost." Nadua spoke in flowing Comanche, and Silent Wolf's hands moved in response. "He says the dead cannot be replaced, only honored through continued living. He says his chief wishes peace and he will honor his chief's wisdom. He says he sees grief in your eyes that matches his own, and perhaps two broken spirits can survive together, where they might perish alone. The ceremony was brief and strange, conducted in both English and Comanche, binding Sarah to a man who never spoke, whose real name she didn't even know. As the sun reached its zenith, she mounted a gentle mare provided by Silent Wolf and rode out of Cedar Ridge, leaving behind everything familiar for a future she couldn't predict. The Comanche camp was a day's ride across the prairie, a collection of teepees arranged in careful order near a clear running creek. Women stopped their work to stare as Silent Wolf led Sarah to a large teepee set apart from the others. Inside, she found it surprisingly spacious and organized, with sleeping furs, cooking implements, and personal belongings arranged with meticulous care. Silent Wolf gestured for her to sit, then began building a fire in the central pit with practiced efficiency. Sarah watched his movements, noting how his silence seemed less like absence and more like presence, as if he was so attuned to the world around him that words had become unnecessary. When the fire caught and warmth began to fill the teepee, he offered her dried meat and water, his eyes asking questions his voice would not. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, accepting the food. She was exhausted from the ride and overwhelmed by the strangeness of everything. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be what you need." Silent Wolf watched her for a long moment. Then his hands moved in signs she was beginning to understand meant patience and time. He pointed to himself, then to her, then made a gesture that seemed to encompass the teepee and the world beyond. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled just slightly, and the expression transformed his face from stern warrior to something gentler, more human. That first night, Silent Wolf laid out separate sleeping furs on opposite sides of the teepee, a gesture of respect that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. As she lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the camp, she realized that perhaps this silent man understood loss and grief better than anyone who might have offered her empty words of comfort. The days that followed Sarah's arrival in the Comanche camp unfolded with a rhythm entirely foreign to her previous life. Each morning, Silent Wolf would wake before dawn, moving quietly through the teepee to tend the fire and prepare a simple breakfast. Sarah found herself watching him constantly, trying to understand this man who had become her husband through circumstances neither had truly chosen. On the third morning, an elderly woman named Queen Eye appeared at the teepee entrance, her weathered face creased with a warm smile. She gestured for Sarah to follow, and though apprehension filled her chest, Sarah obeyed. Queen Eye led her to a group of women working by the creek, their hands busy with the endless tasks of survival, scraping hides, gathering water, grinding dried corn into meal. Through gestures and patient repetition, they began teaching Sarah their ways. Silent Wolf watched from a distance as his wife struggled with tasks that Comanche girls learned in childhood. He saw her frustration when the hide-scraping tool slipped from her soft hands, witnessed her determination as she tried again and again. Something stirred in his chest, an emotion he'd thought died 3 winters past when cavalry soldiers had burned his village and taken everything he loved. That evening, as Sarah returned to the teepee with hands blistered and aching, she found Silent Wolf waiting with a clay pot of healing salve. He took her hands gently in his own, his touch surprisingly tender for such a powerful warrior, and applied the medicine with careful attention. Sarah's breath caught at the intimacy of the gesture, at the concern evident in his dark eyes. "Why don't you speak?" she asked softly, knowing he wouldn't answer with words but hoping he might offer some sign of explanation. "Nadua said you've been silent for 3 years. What happened to you?" Silent Wolf's hand stilled on hers. His jaw tightened, and for a moment Sarah feared she'd overstepped. Then, slowly, he began to sign. His movements were deliberate, filled with pain that transcended language. He pointed to his heart, then made the sign for woman and child. He gestured as if cradling something precious, then swept his hands apart violently, following with the sign for fire and death. Finally, he touched his throat and shook his head, a gesture that needed no interpretation. When his family had died, his voice had died with them. Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks as understanding dawned. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "My Jonathan died too. 6 months ago. A horse accident, they said. But I always wondered if there was more to the story. He'd been gambling, making enemies in town. Some said his horse was spooked deliberately. She'd never spoken these suspicions aloud before, but somehow Silent Wolf's quiet presence made confession easier than any priest's booth ever had. He reached up and gently wiped her tears away, his rough fingers surprisingly gentle against her skin. Then he took her hands again and pressed them to his chest over his heart, holding them there as if to say that he understood her loss, that grief was a language they both spoke fluently. The following weeks transformed Sarah's understanding of everything she'd believed about the Comanche people. She learned that they called themselves Numenu, the people, and that their lives were governed by deep codes of honor and community. She discovered that Silent Wolf was not just any warrior, but had once been a renowned healer, a man who could set broken bones and knew which plants could cure fever and which could ease pain. His silence had not diminished his standing in the tribe. If anything, it had deepened the respect others showed him. Nadua became Sarah's teacher and confidant, explaining the complexities of Comanche life during their long afternoons of work. Silent Wolf was called Swift Water before tragedy took his voice, the older woman explained as they worked on tanning a deer hide together. He was married to the chief's niece, a woman named Bright Morning. Their daughter, Little Flower, had just seen 4 summers when the cavalry came at dawn. Swift Water was hunting far from the village. When he returned, he found only ashes and bodies. Sarah's hand stilled on the hide. How does anyone survive such horror? The same way you survived losing your husband, Nadua replied gently. One breath at a time, one sunrise at a time. Swift Water tried to speak at his family's burial ceremony, tried to sing the death songs, but no sound would come. The medicine man said his grief had swallowed his voice and perhaps one day it would return, or perhaps it would not. What mattered was that he continued to live, to honor those he'd lost by being worthy of the life they no longer had. That night, Sarah looked at Silent Wolf with new eyes. She saw not a savage or a stranger, but a man whose capacity for love had been so vast that its loss had literally stolen his voice. She saw strength in his silence, dignity in his grief, and something else, a gentle attention he paid to her needs that spoke of a good heart beneath the warrior's scars. As spring deepened into early summer, Sarah found herself watching for Silent Wolf's return each evening when he came back from hunting or council meetings. Her heart would lift unexpectedly at the sight of his tall form approaching the teepee. She began to notice small kindnesses, how he always brought her the finest cuts of meat, how he'd placed soft rabbit furs in her sleeping area without comment, how his eyes would seek hers across the camp and hold for just a moment, conveying warmth and something that might have been growing affection. One evening, after a successful buffalo hunt that had the entire camp celebrating, Silent Wolf returned to the teepee with his arms full of the thick hide and choice meat. Sarah was preparing their evening meal, and she'd finally learned to make the pemmican properly, earning praise from Kweeknai that afternoon. She looked up as he entered, and their eyes met in a moment that seemed to stretch and hold. Silent Wolf set down his burdens and moved toward her slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wished. When Sarah didn't move away, he reached out and tucked a strand of her golden hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. His eyes asked a question, and Sarah found herself leaning into his touch, answering without words. "I was so afraid when they told me I had to marry you," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was being given to someone who would hurt me, use me. But you've been nothing but kind. You've been patient when I failed at every task, gentle when I was frightened, present when I needed someone to understand my grief without trying to diminish it with meaningless platitudes." Silent Wolf's thumb traced her jawline tenderly, and Sarah saw in his eyes what he couldn't say with words, that she had become precious to him, that somewhere in their shared silence and mutual loss, something new had begun to grow, something that felt like hope, like possibility, like the first green shoots pushing through winter-hardened ground. But that moment of tenderness was shattered by the sound of horses approaching the camp at full gallop, and urgent shouts in Comanche. Silent Wolf immediately tensed, his warrior instincts taking over. He moved to the teepee entrance and looked out, his expression darkening at whatever he saw. Nadua rushed to their teepee moments later, her face grave with worry. "The scouts have returned with bad news. Captain Thornton has been replaced at Cedar Ridge. The new commander, Colonel Harrison, is calling the peace treaty a mistake. He's demanding the return of all white captives, and he's threatened to attack the camp if his demands aren't met within 3 days. He specifically mentioned you, Sarah. He says you were taken against your will and must be returned immediately. Sarah's heart plummeted. She looked at Silent Wolf, who stood rigid with tension, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. She saw the war raging behind his eyes, the desire to keep her safe battling with his unwillingness to bring destruction upon his people for his own selfish wants. "I wasn't taken," Sarah said firmly, finding her voice strong and clear. "I chose this. I came willingly. Doesn't that matter?" "Not to men like Colonel Harrison," Nadua replied sadly. "To him, you're a white woman who needs saving from savages. Regardless of what you want, the chief is calling an emergency council. Silent Wolf must attend." The council fire burned bright in the center of the camp as the tribal elders gathered, their faces painted with the gravity of the situation. Silent Wolf sat among the warriors, his jaw set with determination, while Sarah waited anxiously outside the council circle with the other women. Nadua stayed close to her side, translating the heated discussion that echoed across the camp. Chief Iron Bear, a man whose wisdom had guided the tribe through countless challenges, spoke first. "Colonel Harrison seeks war, not peace. He uses Sarah Bennett as an excuse to break the treaty we worked so hard to build. If we give her up, he will find another reason to attack. If we keep her, he attacks now. Either path leads to bloodshed." One of the younger warriors, a hot-headed man named Running Deer, stood abruptly. "Then let us fight. We are Numanu. We do not surrender our people to the white man's demands." Silent Wolf claimed this woman honorably, through proper agreement with their own leader. They cannot change the terms now. But an older warrior named Gray Elk shook his head slowly. "Fighting will bring more soldiers than we can count. They will pursue us across the plains, burn our camps, kill our children as they killed Silent Wolf's daughter. Is one woman worth the destruction of our people?" Sarah felt those words like a physical blow. She was the cause of this crisis, the spark that might ignite a war. She thought of Little Flower, of Bright Morning, of all the Comanche families who had already suffered so much loss. How could she allow her presence to bring more death to people who had shown her nothing but kindness? Silent Wolf suddenly stood, his movement commanding immediate attention. Every eye turned to him as he began to sign, his hands moving with passionate intensity. Ndua whispered the translation to Sarah. "He says that Sarah Bennett came willingly, that she has learned our ways and honored our customs. He says she has brought light back into his darkness, that she is his wife in the eyes of the people and the spirits. But he also says he will not let his personal happiness destroy the tribe. He proposes that he and Sarah will go to Fort Cedar Ridge together, that they will speak to this Colonel Harrison and make him understand the truth." Chief Iron Bear studied Silent Wolf with penetrating eyes. "And if he does not listen, if he tries to take her by force and imprison or kill you?" Silent Wolf's hands moved again, slower this time, weighted with sorrow but firm with resolve. "Then at least the tribe will be safe. My life and my happiness are not worth more than the people's survival." Sarah couldn't remain silent any longer. She pushed through the circle of women, ignoring the gasps of surprise as she approached the council fire, a breach of protocol that would normally be forbidden, but desperation gave her courage. "Please," she said, her voice ringing clear in the night air. "Let me speak." Chief Iron Bear raised a hand, silencing the protests. "The white woman wishes to speak. We will hear her words." Sarah's heart pounded as every face turned toward her, but she forced herself to stand tall. "I was Sarah Bennett, a widow with no future, facing starvation and destitution. Captain Thornton told me I had to marry Silent Wolf or leave the fort with nothing. I was terrified, filled with all the horrible stories I'd been told about the Comanche people. But I was wrong. Everything I'd been taught was wrong." She turned to look at Silent Wolf, her eyes finding his across the firelight. "This man who you call Silent Wolf, who was once Swiftwater, has shown me more kindness and respect in these few weeks than I found in years of so-called civilized society. He has been patient with my failures, gentle with my grief, and honorable in every action. The women of this tribe have welcomed me and taught me with more sisterhood than I ever knew back in Cedar Ridge. You are not savages. You are people with rich traditions, deep honor, and capacity for love that puts my own people to shame. Tears streamed down her face now, but her voice remained steady. I will not let Silent Wolf sacrifice himself for me, and I will not let Colonel Harrison use me as an excuse to destroy innocent people. I have an idea, but it requires that you trust me, and that Silent Wolf trusts me enough to let me do something that might seem like betrayal. But I swear on everything I hold sacred that it is not. Chief Iron Bear leaned forward with interest. Speak your plan, Sarah Bennett, who has become one of the people. Sarah took a deep breath. I will return to Fort Cedar Ridge alone and tell Colonel Harrison that I was indeed taken against my will, that I wish to be rescued. I will tell him I've learned that the Comanche are planning to move their camp north, far from this region, to avoid conflict. I will convince him that his show of force has worked, that the tribe is retreating, and that there's no need for military action. Silent Wolf's expression turned thunderous and his hands flew in vehement protest. But Sarah walked to him and took his hands in hers, stilling them. Listen to me, please. Once Harrison believes the crisis is over, once he thinks he's won and the Comanche threat is gone, I'll escape. I'll come back to you, to our home, to our people. But this time, I'll come as someone who rejected the white man's world by choice, not as a captive. I'll come as your wife who chose you freely, and there will be no treaty violation to justify war. It's too dangerous, Nadwa protested. What if Harrison doesn't believe you? What if he keeps you imprisoned? Then Silent Wolf and a small party of warriors can observe from a distance, Sarah replied, her mind racing through possibilities. If I don't emerge from the fort within 2 days, you'll know something went wrong. But I don't think it will. Harrison wants to be a hero, wants to report that he rescued a white woman and scared off the Comanche without firing a shot. He wants glory, not truth. Men like him always do. Chief Iron Bear looked at Silent Wolf. This is your wife, Swiftwater, who no longer speaks. The decision must be yours. Silent Wolf stood frozen, his eyes locked on Sarah's face. She could see the war raging within him, the fear of losing another person he loved battling against the logic of her plan, his desire to protect her fighting with his duty to the tribe. Finally, slowly, his hands moved in signs that spoke of trust and terror, of love and faith. He would agree, but only if he could be among the warriors who watched the fort, ready to storm its walls if she didn't emerge safely. The plan was set in motion the next morning. Sarah dressed once again in the black morning dress she'd arrived in, though it hung looser now on her frame, transformed by weeks of hard work and different food. She braided her hair in the white woman's style, trying to reclaim the appearance of the frightened widow she'd once been, though inside she felt fundamentally changed. Silent Wolf helped her onto the gentle mare, his hands lingering on hers longer than necessary. She looked down at him, this beautiful, strong, silent man who had somehow become everything to her in such a short time. I will come back to you, she promised. I swear it on my life, on my love for you. I choose you, Swiftwater. I choose this life, these people, this future. No colonel or army can change that. For the first time since she'd known him, Silent Wolf's eyes filled with tears. He reached up and pulled her down to him, pressing his forehead against hers in a gesture of profound intimacy. Then, to her shock and the gasps of everyone watching, his lips moved. The sound that emerged was rusty, broken, barely more than a whisper, but it was unmistakably a voice. His voice, speaking for the first time in 3 years. Come back to me, Sarah. I cannot survive losing you. Sarah's heart shattered and soared simultaneously. She kissed him fiercely, pouring all her determination and love into that connection. I will. I promise. The ride to Fort Cedar Ridge took 6 hours, with Silent Wolf and 4 warriors following at a careful distance, hidden by the rolling prairie landscape. When Sarah approached the fort gates, she made sure she looked exhausted and traumatized, her shoulders slumped and her eyes downcast. The sentries immediately called for Colonel Harrison, a barrel-chested man with cold blue eyes and a mustache waxed to sharp points. He looked Sarah up and down with satisfaction. Mrs. Bennett, thank God we've found you. Those savages will pay for taking you. Please, Colonel, Sarah said, her voice trembling with calculated emotion. I just want this nightmare to end. They said they're leaving, moving north to avoid conflict. They're breaking camp as we speak. Can't we just let them go? I can't bear the thought of more violence." Harrison's eyes gleamed with triumph. "Moving north, you say? Well, perhaps we've taught them a lesson after all. Don't worry, Mrs. Bennett. You're safe now. We'll get you cleaned up and send word to your family back east. You'll want to leave this godforsaken territory, I'm sure." Sarah spent that day and the following night in the fort, playing the role of grateful rescued captive while actually gathering intelligence. She learned that Harrison had only 30 soldiers under his command, that his tough talk about attacking the Comanche was mostly bluster designed to advance his military career. She learned that a supply wagon was leaving for San Antonio in 2 days, and that Harrison assumed she'd be on it. On the second morning, as dawn broke pink and gold over the prairie, Sarah made her move. She'd befriended a young private named Thomas, who reminded her of her younger brother, and she'd convinced him that she needed to take an early morning walk to clear her head, that being cooped up after her ordeal was making her anxious. Thomas, kind-hearted and naive, agreed to let her walk outside the fort walls if she stayed within sight. But Sarah had no intention of staying within sight. The moment she was beyond the fort's perimeter, she ran. She ran toward the creek where she knew Silent Wolf was waiting, her black dress hiked up, her hair streaming behind her, her heart pounding with exhilaration and fear. She heard Thomas shouting behind her, heard the alarm being raised at the fort, but she didn't stop. And then she saw him, Silent Wolf on his painted stallion, riding toward her at full gallop, his hair flying, his face transformed with hope and desperate relief. He reached down and swept her up onto the horse in front of him without breaking stride, his arms coming around her like bands of iron, protective and sure. They rode hard, the other warriors flanking them, putting distance between themselves and any pursuit. But Sarah knew there would be no real pursuit. Harrison wouldn't risk his small force chasing Comanche warriors across open prairie, not when he could simply report that the disturbed captive had succumbed to her trauma and run back to her captors. He'd gotten his glory already by supposedly scaring off the Comanche. Chasing Sarah would only complicate his narrative. When they finally slowed, miles from the fort, Silent Wolf turned Sarah in his arms to face him. His eyes were wet with tears, his expression a mixture of joy and residual fear. "You came back," he whispered, his newly restored voice still rough but growing stronger. "You actually came back." "I told you I would," Sarah replied, framing his face with her hands. "I love you, Swiftwater. I choose you, this life, our people. I choose it freely, completely, forever." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, a kiss that spoke of new beginnings and second chances, of two broken people who had found wholeness in each other. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Silent Wolf spoke again, each word clearly precious to him. "I thought my voice died with my family. I thought I would never speak again, never feel again, never love again. But you brought me back to life, Sarah. You gave me a reason to find my voice, to hope, to believe in tomorrow." The journey back to camp was filled with conversation. 3 years of stored words pouring out of Silent Wolf as he told Sarah stories of his childhood, his training as a healer, his love for Bright Morning and Little Flower, his gratitude that grief had not been the end of his story but rather a harsh passage to something new and equally precious. The camp erupted in celebration when they returned. Chief Iron Bear declared that Sarah had proven herself one of the people through her courage and cleverness, that her loyalty to the tribe and to Silent Wolf could never be questioned. The women embraced her as a sister, and Queen Eye wept with joy at seeing her adopted daughter safely home. That night, in their teepee, with the sounds of celebration still echoing outside, Silent Wolf and Sarah lay together in the firelight. He spoke softly, his voice a gift he'd given back to the world because of her. "The soldiers killed my first family, but they could not kill my capacity to love. You taught me that. You showed me that surviving tragedy is not betraying those we've lost, but honoring them by living fully." Sarah traced the scars on his chest, each one a story of survival. "We both lost everything and found each other in the rubble. Maybe that's the real miracle. Not that we survived our losses, but that we were brave enough to love again despite knowing how much it can hurt. Will you miss your old life?" Silent Wolf asked, genuine curiosity in his eyes. The cities, the dresses, the things white society values. Sarah smiled and shook her head. I miss nothing of that world. Here, I've found purpose, community, and love that asks nothing of me except that I be genuine. Here I've found you. A man whose silence taught me more about communication than a lifetime of empty words ever did, whose strength is tempered with gentleness, whose love is proven through actions rather than promises. Silent Wolf pulled her closer, his arms wrapped securely around her. Then we will build our future together one day at a time. We will honor those we've lost by living well, by loving deeply, by being worthy of the second chances we've been given. As summer deepened and the prairie bloomed with wild flowers, Sarah and Silent Wolf became the heart of the tribe's continued renewal. His voice, once thought lost forever, now shared healing knowledge with young apprentices. Her hands, once soft and useless, now worked leather and gathered herbs with skill. Together they represented hope, proof that even the deepest wounds could heal, that love could emerge from loss, and that choosing to live fully was the greatest honor anyone could pay to those who no longer could. The threat from Fort Cedar Ridge faded as Colonel Harrison was transferred east, his replacement proving far more interested in maintaining peace than seeking glory. The treaty held, strengthened rather than weakened by the crisis it had weathered. And in the teepee that had once housed only grief and silence, laughter now rang out regularly. Swiftwater had reclaimed his name along with his voice, and Sarah had found her true home not in the place of her birth, but in the arms of a man who understood that sometimes the greatest love stories begin in the ashes of broken dreams, nurtured by patience, watered by tears, and blooming into something more beautiful than anything that came before. They had both been forced into an arrangement neither wanted, bound by circumstances beyond their control, but they had transformed that forced beginning into a chosen future, proving that destiny is less about where we start and more about what we make of the journey. Together they had found not just survival, but joy, not just companionship, but profound love. And in doing so, they had written a new story, one of healing, courage, and the transformative power of choosing to open your heart, even after it's been shattered. Their love became legend in the tribe, told around fires for generations to come. The story of the silent warrior who found his voice through love, and the widow who found her home in the arms of the man she'd been forced to marry, only to discover he was exactly who she'd needed all along.